Morning, everybody. It's morning here anyway. I'm Norman Fischer, and I'm really happy to be here with you celebrating Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, which is such a terrific book and so important for so many of us. And I've read this book many, many, many times over many, many years. In the beginning, I couldn't understand it at all. What is he talking about? And yet, it was so intriguing that I was completely hooked right away. Suzuki Roshi has a way of saying things that seems so true, even though you can hardly know what he's talking about. Actually, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind is not really Suzuki Roshi's work. If you actually look at his talks, the whole talk, the raw transcription, which you can actually find fairly easily online at San Francisco Zen Center website or at David Chadwick's wonderful Crooked Cucumber website, you'll see that Suzuki Roshi's talks are actually long and rambling, very hard to understand. And a lot of the times, you really have no idea what he's talking about because he's in the process of trying to figure out how to speak English, trying to figure out how to talk about Dharma in English, and trying to figure out how to talk about Dharma to a bunch of young Americans who have no idea at all about Buddhism. So he's wandering a lot. He's experimenting with different ways of saying things. Very often he laughs at his own jokes, and you have no idea what the joke is. His talks are kind of like that. And so that's why Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind is really a co-creation of Suzuki Roshi, and mainly, I think, Trudy Dixon, who is credited with editing the talks. And I'm guessing, although I'm not 100% sure, that Richard Baker, who was Suzuki Roshi's leading American disciple and my own ordination teacher, I'm guessing had a big hand in it too. And no doubt there were many others whom I'm not aware of. All these people love Suzuki Roshi a lot, and I think were really respectful of his words, so I doubt that they changed anything to speak of. They probably cleaned up the English grammar a bit, but they did do a lot of cutting and shaping and framing, and that's really what makes Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind what it is. It is a labor of love and of devotion, and I think you feel that in the text, and that's one of the reasons why it is such a marvelous text. My guess is that the young Zen students listening to Suzuki Roshi loved him because he respected them and he loved them, probably in a way that none of them had ever been loved before. He saw their beauty and he saw their confusion, and I think he loved them just as much for their confusion as for their beauty. And I think that was a unique experience for the people who were in his presence. As I said, when I first read Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, I was intrigued, but I didn't understand. In later readings, I was surprised at how seldom and lightly Suzuki Roshi mentions Buddhist teachings. He seemed to be mostly improvising. But then, still later, I marveled at exactly the opposite thing. How much everything that he says, everything is a clear reflection of the classical early and the later Mahayana Zen and Dogen Zen teachings. Yet he never sounds like he's repeating teachings that he has studied. And it never sounds like he's teaching you about Buddhism. It sounds more like he's just talking about the way he sees and feels things. And as he says many, many times, there are no teachings to stick to. There's just life and living life. And that if you see life and live life truly and carefully, it's going to come out sounding a lot like the Buddhist teachings. In still later readings, I came to appreciate just being with Suzuki Roshi, just hearing his voice, a voice of calmness and stability, kindness, but very, very low key, no fanfare. His Dharma expression is very quiet and subtle. He really is not trying to impress or make a big deal out of anything. In fact, most of the time, he seems to be gently trying to disabuse his listeners of the big deal they seem to have in their minds about Zen or spirituality or the powers of meditation. He just keeps saying over and over again, just do it. Just do the practice. Just live. Just be sincere. Just be constant. In fact, in my reading, these seem to be the two most important English words for Suzuki Roshi. Neither one of which, as far as I can tell, is a direct translation of any specific Buddhist term. Sincerity, meaning, I think, just do whatever you're doing modestly, the best you can, but with your whole heart. Just put your whole heart into it without congratulating yourself or looking for anything more beyond that activity. And constancy. Just be steady. Just be ongoing with your practice. Don't shoot up a big flame or shout out a big shout. Don't have a big enlightenment and then throw a party the next day and then go on to other things that are more exciting. If you happen to get enlightened, just show up the next day as if nothing had happened. Nothing did happen. Practice is just ongoing every day, 30, 40, 50 years, a lifetime, which I can tell you goes by very swiftly. My own teacher, Sojin Weitzman, who just stepped down last month or earlier this month at the age of 91 as abbot of the Berkeley Zen Center, embodied this way of Suzuki Roshi, sincerity, constancy. He just showed up every day for Zazen and guided the community by his example. And he did this for more than 50 years. And although Sojin is now finishing up some writing projects, like Suzuki Roshi, he is not a writer. And he's not interested in the elaborations of language. As I said, Suzuki Roshi didn't write Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. And as far as I know, I don't think he ever imagined that his rambling Dharma talks given to his students would become one of the world classics of Buddhist literature. I'm sure he did not consider his talks to be literary productions. He was just hanging around with the people he was practicing with and sharing his thoughts the best he could. And he really wanted his young listeners to understand. So Suzuki Roshi was a careful and loyal follower of Dogen Zenji, the founder of Japanese Soto Zen. Dogen was actually quite an unusual Zen master because he wrote a lot. He actually wrote, and we have a lot of his developed thought that we can study. It's an interesting historical anomaly that Dogen, although revered, was forgotten in Japan for many generations. His actual writings were not read, really, even though he was venerated as a founder. And his writings were largely rediscovered in the 20th century and retranslated and much commented on at that point in the light of Western thought that the Japanese were paying attention to by that point. So a young monk like Suzuki Roshi, born in 1904, looked to a modern Dogen for his understanding, a Dogen that was a 20th century Dogen, who was at that time taking his place among world religious thinkers. And so Suzuki Roshi's traditional understanding is actually a very progressive and modern understanding. And that's one of the secrets of the teaching of Suzuki Roshi. I myself have been studying Dogen steadily, although only in English, which is quite limited, ever since I was a young man. And what I love most about Dogen's understanding of Buddhism, and this, of course, is also true of Suzuki Roshi, who gets this from Dogen, is his poignant validation of everyday life, including its attachments and tragedies. For Dogen and Suzuki Roshi, ordinary, beleaguered human life isn't something to be transcended and overcome with enlightenment. Enlightenment is just to live this sad and tragic life with some joy and understanding. Not to end suffering, but to completely enter suffering and see its beauty. And that's the theme of the short piece I want to share with you today from Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. I have a very early edition of the book, which I don't know if it's still, you can find it now, but this piece appears on page 118 of my early edition of the book. It's in part 3, Right Understanding. The title of this section is called Attachment, Non-Attachment, and the subtitle is That We Are Attached to Some Beauty is Also Buddha's Activity. So I'm going to read to you just the first couple of paragraphs of this piece. Dogen Zenji said, "Even though it is midnight, dawn is here. Even though dawn comes, it is nighttime." This kind of statement conveys the understanding transmitted from Buddha to the patriarchs. Nowadays we say ancestors, not patriarchs, but Buddha to the patriarchs, and from the patriarchs to Dogen and to us. Nighttime and daytime are not different. The same thing is sometimes called nighttime, sometimes called daytime. They are one thing. Zazen practice and everyday activity are one thing. We call Zazen everyday life and everyday life Zazen. But usually we think, now Zazen is over and we will go about our everyday activity. But this is not the right understanding. They are the same thing. We have nowhere to escape. So in activity there should be calmness, and in calmness there should be activity. Calmness and activity are not different. So that might seem a little confusing at first, and that's true. You know, Suzuki Roshi, the way he talks, it's easy to get confused. But don't we think like that, right? Zazen is Zazen. The bell just rang. Zazen is over. Now I go back to my ordinary life. But ordinary life is just an idea. You might not notice this, but really it's true. Recently, I've been reading a text of a poet friend of mine, and in her text, she refers a lot to some stuff about the theory of everyday life. Yes, believe it or not, the French theorists like Michel de Certeau and Henri Lefebvre have big theories about everyday life. And they point out that you think, you know, it's just you washing the dishes. But no, inevitably, your head is full of stuff that has come to you from your conditioning, from your culture, from your economy, your education. So your experience of everyday life is really burdened by all your ideas about it and about yourself. And likewise, you have a lot of ideas about Zazen too. One of which is that Zazen is different from your everyday life. But Zazen is not your ideas of Zazen, and everyday life is not your ideas about everyday life. No matter what your activity, you are alive. That's the salient point. There is mind and heart and world meeting one another all the time, moment after moment. That's what's actually going on. If something is happening that upsets you, like, say, the recent election that we had in America, like the pandemic that we have all over the world, which is really scary, or maybe something in your personal life, you can get upset. But at the same time, when you have made practice your life, in your life practice, even while you're upset, you can feel confident and calm, even if you're practically freaked out, which sounds like an odd thing to say, but experientially, you can feel that way. Okay, yes, I see by my body and the way that I'm breathing and the way that my thoughts are going that I'm freaked out. But at the same time, very strongly, I know I'm okay. Nothing bad is going to happen. And should something bad happen, because sometimes bad things happen, well, okay, that will be my new situation, which will be just like my situation right now. Body, mind, heart, and world meeting at a point. It could happen. It would be quite spectacular, wouldn't it? If I died right now, before I got to the end of this sentence, that would be shocking. It would be really make lions roar and me famous forever if I did that. But it would be okay, right? It would be okay. That moment is coming anyway, so it's okay. So I think that we could see things this way. We could actually live this way. And if we did, it would be a very normal thing, really, not a spectacular thing, right? Just to live and die. What's the big deal? I think this is what Suzuki Roshi is pointing to in this passage. A little later on, he says that we are attached to some beauty. This is in the same passage a little later. That we are attached to some beauty is itself Buddha's activity. We should know that. If you know that, it is all right to attach to something. If it is Buddha's attachment, it is non-attachment. This seems like a very unusual thing for a Buddhist teacher to say, isn't it? And it's really wonderful to me. This is what has always appealed to me, as I said in the beginning, about Suzuki Roshi and about Dogen Zenji's teaching. As we all know, we live in a very worldly historical period, and so that's why religion, in many ways, is not so popular nowadays. It's not really what's happening in the world the way it was at some point in the past, because religion seems otherworldly. The world is corrupt, painful, difficult. You should find a way out. Go to nirvana. Find peace. And of course, in Buddhist discourse, the worst thing of all is attachment. Buddhism is about non-attachment, letting go, or so we think. But here, Suzuki Roshi very directly says the opposite. And yet, again, it's very subtle what he's saying. Seems like the opposite, but not exactly the opposite. Our attachment, he's telling us, our attachment, let's say, to the people we love, or as he says here, our attachment to something beautiful, that attachment is Buddha's activity. Our human attachment is not a problem to be overcome. It's really something beautiful. Our attachment is literally wonderful. It's a wonder. It's one of the great wonders of the world. It's given to us as human beings to be attached to one another and to be attached to beauty. Suzuki Roshi is saying that's a good thing. That's Buddha's activity. We think, though, that it's our activity. We think it's about us. We think, don't we, that our lives are about us, but they're not. Our lives are Buddha's life. Our work is Buddha's work. We should know that, Suzuki Roshi says. And then when we know our life is not about us, but it's actually Buddha's life, our life is bigger than our life. And when that's so, we can be okay with our attachment. We can be easy with our attachment. We don't have to be so stuck on our attachment. That's why he says Buddha's attachment is non-attachment. Yes, it's attachment. And of course, we cry when we lose the one we love. And yes, we prefer beauty to ugliness. We prefer goodness to evil, as we should. So there's some attachment there, but also it's non-attachment because we accept our human attachment as Buddha's attachment. So we're not waving it around and making a big mess out of everything. We can be quiet and patient in our life. A little later on, he says, again, strangely it seems, so in love there should be hate or non-attachment. And in hate, there should be love or acceptance. Love and hate are one thing. We should not attach to love alone. We should accept hate. Again, it's a little shocking to hear that. But we have to think a little bit more about what he's saying. I think here when he says love, he means attachment. And when he says hate, he means non-attachment. So in love, there should be hate. That's true if you think about it. If you love too desperately, and it's all attachment, you drive away the people you love. You're not able to love them. You're all over them. Your need for them is so big, right? It's too much. To love somebody, you have to give them some space. With your non-attachment, your love is better. It's less selfish. It's kind. And in your hate, that is, when it comes to things you really don't like, and maybe you really hate them, like your enemies, or maybe you hate hatred itself, there should be a little love in there. Maybe you shouldn't hate hatred so much. That's too much hate on top of hate. So when it comes to things you don't like or even hate, a little love softens you. You can be tolerant, even kind to yourself and to others. It's very provocative, I think, but it's quite right in experience. We shouldn't be attached to love and reject hate. Apply this to the world around us now. Maybe we need to have some love for people we hate or ideas we hate. Maybe we need to accept both love and hate. It's very subtle, but quite true. There's more love in accepting hate than insisting only on love. It's odd, but very true. Now I want to read you the final paragraph in this section as he applies all of this to our emotional life. Emotionally, we have many problems, but these problems are not actual problems. They are something created. They are problems pointed out by our self-centered ideas or views. Because we point out something, there are problems. But actually, it is not possible to point out anything in particular. Happiness is sorrow. Sorrow is happiness. There is happiness in difficulty, difficulty in happiness. Even though the ways we feel are different, they are not really different. In essence, they are the same. This is the true understanding transmitted from Buddha to us. So yes, we have a lot of emotional problems. I actually think that the state of the world is a mental health problem. It's creating a lot of anguish among us. We have a lot of emotional problems. But Suzuki Roshi is saying that these problems are created problems, created by ourselves, created by the way we think about things. We want or expect this. We don't want or expect that. Behind our problems is the thought that somehow or other we could and have failed to organize the world, the way we thought we wanted it. But we can't do that. As he says, we point things out. I think by this he means we define things a particular way, even though they're not that way. And then based on that definition, which we don't even realize we're we're making, we suffer. But he says, any way we define things is a made-up way. It's never really true. It's never entirely true. And that's why it's really true what he says. Happiness is sorrow, and sorrow is happiness. There's happiness in difficulty, and difficulty in happiness. Again, it sounds like, just paradoxical speaking, but it's true. We all know it, right? Our human feeling goes up and down, always mixing up. There really is sorrow if you look right in the middle of happiness. And there really is happiness right in the middle of sorrow. And with our practice, maybe we can slow down our mind enough to see that. And sometimes the thing that we dread the most happens. And we find that there's some beauty that comes of it. So maybe it's actually possible that we could stop fighting with ourselves and with the world and be willing to just live this life with its many colors and feelings. Isn't human life just like the seasons of the year, which are good and bad. We love the summer, but sometimes it's just too hot, right? You wish it was over. And you love the winter, but sometimes it goes on so long, it's so cold, frozen day after day after day. But isn't that the way the world turns? Spring, summer, fall, winter. We may not know what we're doing, but the earth knows what it's doing. So the words of Suzuki Roshi, I think, are just like the earth speaking. I think the Buddha Dharma, to me, is like the earth speaking. At first, maybe it seems hard to understand, but when you harmonize with it, put your whole body into it, it just flows. So thank you very much, everybody, for listening to my words this morning about Suzuki Roshi's talking. Take care. Thank you.